tradition, we often encounter the claim that Zionism is the natural or inevitable expression of Jewish history. That claim is, put simply, historically false. It also erases the legacies of Jewish communities who lived before Zionism and those who resisted it after its emergence. Importantly, the term coexistence in the panel's title does not refer to the liberal Zionist model of segregation and unequal tolerance under apartheid. Instead, coexistence, in the sense which this panel is invoking, begins with the unconditional right of Palestinians to exist, to return, and to determine the future on their land. At the same time, it recognizes that Jews, without requiring a colonial national homeland, have existed and will continue to exist in diverse forms across time and place. To explore these histories and political horizons, we are joined by 4 speakers whose scholarly and activist work addresses different facets of this subject. Joining us online is Yakov Rabkin, professor at the University of Montreal, historian and author of the book A Threat from Within, A Century of Jewish Opposition to Zionism. His talk explores the wide range of Jewish opposition to Zionism, from the rabbinic interpretation of Zionism as a betrayal of Judaism, the middle-class anxieties of Zionism as a threat to social integration, and the socialist rejection of Zionism as a diversion from class struggle. Our second speaker is Donny Gluckstein, historian, trade unionist, and co-author of The Radical Jewish Tradition. He will discuss the emergence of a radical Jewish working class movement in the 19th and early 20th centuries, grounded in class solidarity and Doigkeit. This tradition gave rise to the Bund and Marxist currents spreading across the diaspora after the Russian Revolution until it was crushed by imperialism and Nazism, clearing the way for Zionism to become dominant. The third speaker is Haim, Bresheeth, filmmaker, historian, and author of An Army Like No Other. Haim's talk will take us to medieval Spain, particularly the Al-Andalus period between the years 711 and 1013, where Muslim, Jewish, and Christian communities lived among each other. He argues that such historical examples, as well as examples from Palestine's own more recent past, offer essential frameworks for imagining a future beyond Zionist occupation. The fourth speaker is Awad Abdelfatah, a political writer, activist, and co-founder of the One Democratic State campaign. He will present the political case for a single democratic state in all of Palestine, discussing the Palestinian resistance, the exclusion of Palestinian citizens of Israel, the failures of the Oslo Accords. He advocates for understanding Palestine as a global justice issue, teaching us that to achieve true equality, we need international solidarity and anti-colonial unity. Moderating this panel is Rahma Zein. She works as a consultant for Tech for Palestine, a coalition of technologists and organizers building infrastructure for the Palestinian liberation movement. Thank you very much, Rahma, for moderating this panel, and the floor is yours.
It's been a while since I've moderated, but I think I'm in a safe space. So kindness is key. Before we start, can we all just acknowledge the person next to us and just thank them for being here, because this is an important moment in time where we stand against absolute tyranny. So, yeah. And I think what's best is we're going to start history and then a summation with Awad, which would be important, so that when you're in the midst of conversation, we learn from one another so you know what you're saying. So first, we start with Yakov. And my question to you is, with regards to the way Zionism uses revisionist history and misuses religion, and sort of acts as if Zionism is a natural development for the modern Jew, so that it then justifies its identity, justifies the state. So any criticism is then dubbed anti-Semitic. So from this historic and religious standpoint, how do you then refute that?
Thank you. I've written my talk, so I will take exactly the time that I've got. Safe in the knowledge that we have with us my good friend Awad Abdelfatah, who will speak on the future of Palestine, I would like to speak about the past. In order to understand our future options, we are best advised to examine history. Let us turn to an obscure corner of the history of both Islam and Europe at a time and at a place where they could be thought of together. This little-known chapter of European history teaches us a crucial lesson about Islam, Christianity, and Judaism's complex relationships. Speaking about this is crucial when racism, white supremacism, destructive capitalism, brutal imperial crimes, and normalized genocide undermine every vestige of law and order, replacing it with the dark criminal venality of the West. So maybe the past can help. The time is the 8th century. The place is Al-Andalus, the Muslim name of Spain under the Muslims. Much later, historians will call the period Convivencia, meaning life together. The crucial time is between the year 711, when the Muslim Berber fighters, led by Umayyad Arabs, took most of Spain. Their advance checked at Poitiers, near Paris, and the year 1013, when the Caliphate of the Al-Andalus falls. So it is about 300 years. Back to Iberia, they abandoned nomadic existence, becoming sedentary but dynamic city builders. The final fall of this community will come 800 years later, when Granada is conquered in 1492, its Muslims and Jews expelled around the Mediterranean by the Catholic monarchs' Reconquista. This is when the Holy Inquisition lights auto da fe's fires in city centers and where books burn with the people who cherished them, wrote them, and read them. Muslim and Jewish converts to Christianity have been burned at those fires. The barbarism of the Reconquista consumes the liberalism once characterizing Al-Andalus, without which the Renaissance would be impossible. So what was Al-Andalus? The invading Muslim force was relatively small, so had to move peacefully. While they developed a society of rare tolerance, Europe is a place of dark passions and anti-intellectual sentiments. The Caliphate of Cordoba becomes known as the ornament of the world. In Jewish history, it's called Tor HaZahav, meaning the Golden Age. Both titles were warranted. Cordoba, for example, had 70 libraries. The largest one of the Caliphate had 500,000 books. That is 1,000 times more than the biggest library in Europe at the time. Cordoba was the heart of culture in Europe. It all started tragically. The Umayyad Caliphate in Damascus ends in 750 as the Abbasids murdered the ruling family, leaving one survivor, the young Abdul Rahman. He escapes to the very end of Muslim rule to Al-Andalus and will never see Damascus again. Indeed, the Abbasids themselves soon abandoned Damascus, moving to Baghdad to set up the great Muslim cultural and political center there. As ruler, Abdul Rahman bestowed on Al-Andalus the Umayyad liberal Islam. He shares his family's passions: art, architecture, science, literature, and an openness to other cultures, which made Islam so attractive in Asia and Africa. This was a modernizing, dynamic, liberal, and scientific Islam, while Europe was stuck in the Dark Ages. It still is. Abdelrahman thought that the great energy of Arab tribes released onto the world by Islam, bearing not just Islam, but Arabic, the language and culture. Islam was open to other monotheistic faiths, sharing family likeness. With Jews, they shared a great passion for poetry. This liberated Hebrew, then a purely liturgical language. Revived by the encounter with its Semitic sister, Hebrew became a poetical vehicle in Al-Andalus, bringing Jews and Muslims closer than ever before. Jewish sages like Maimonides regularly wrote Hebrew in Arabic script and Arabic in Hebrew letters. This epitomizes the cultural intimacy between both communities. The caliphate will survive for 300 years. This is not, a couple of years, yeah? Becoming the cultural, scientific, and artistic engine of Europe. While European city-states destroyed each other, frozen in religious zealotry leading to the Crusades, Al-Andalus was free of fervent Christianity. Cordoba's Christians shared in the love of Arabic, into which they translated their liturgy, abandoning Latin. The Jewish community suffering Judeophobia under the Visigoths now flowered. The great cultural amalgam of this gathering, with intercommunal relations near equal, something inconceivable in Europe itself, enabled a socio-cultural revolution surpassing even Baghdad. This will kickstart the Renaissance. Convivencia, of a similar nature, though less resplendent, existed in North Africa, Southern Europe, the Balkans, the Ottoman Empire, Arabia, the Middle East, Iran, and India under the Mughals. Of course, this is also true about Palestine. You know that. In Palestine, Jews, Muslims, and Christians lived closely together, unaware of the great racist passions sweeping Europe until the Crusades. Today, we witness the return of these racist passions, as Europe has never fully embraced convivencia. In that sense, Zionism was and remains a supremacist, racist European movement, conflictual by nature, part of Europe's obsession with corralling and genociding natives. Genocides, of course, happened elsewhere, but Europe clearly perfected this tool of capitalism, colonialism, and imperialism, from Ireland to Australia. Ethnic cleansing, genocide, and suppression of natives were essential Eurocentric discourses. They were the technologies of racism. And to end, thus Zionism brought European racism and forced expulsion onto the Mashrek in a manner foreseen and planned by Herzl. The current growing revulsion against Israel's genocide may hasten its own decline as an imperialist tool by the very nature of modernity. There is no place for Zionism in today's world, anywhere. This poses, and I'm unfortunately, after talking about 300 years of closeness, of intimacy, of actually love between communities despite the difficulties, I come to a sad ending. This poses an existential question for Jews everywhere. Which side are you on? with a declining West or with the rest? With the European past or as part of the convivencial future in the Arab East? Do you support colonialism? Do you support genocide? Jews need to decide. Are we able to decolonize our minds so that we may partake in the decolonization of Palestine? Because there is no other way. 2 years ago, I was sure that one democratic state is the only way. Today, in the time of genocide, I am less certain. Israel made the two-state solution impossible. Now it may have made the one-state solution impossible in the foreseeable future through its incredible genocide of the Palestinians. Will Palestinian genocide survivors share the country with mass murderers? I doubt it. Thank you.
And for those of you who haven't seen Haim's viral arrest video, I encourage you all to see it because it's also very helpful in action. And now we have Donny, who's also going to talk to us about the Bund movement. And I'm interested to know how that was replaced with Zionism.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So I'm here from Edinburgh, and the reason I mention it is because we're in the city where Herzl's Jewish state was published. But Edinburgh was the place where Lord Balfour came from, and without the Balfour Declaration, nothing would have happened in terms of Zionism being successful. So it's interesting to bring the two places together here. And it's important to understand Zionism is a complete break from Jewish history. In 1948, the Constitution of Israel says that, it says, the people remained faithful to Israel throughout their dispersion and never ceased to pray and hope for their return to it. It's a complete and utter lie, absolute lie. The first time that idea that Jewish people should establish a state somewhere, and Herzl didn't even say Palestine, he wasn't sure where. He said, we need a Jewish state, was 1896. That's when it began, not 2,000 years before. So what's going on for the 2,000 years before? Well, I'll tell you what's going on. Jews are the most international people in the world, dispersed right across the planet. And in the century before 1948, there's a new development, which is the development of capitalism, the development of industry, the development of nationalism, the 19th century. And that turns the Jews into, large numbers of Jews, into consciously anti-capitalist and internationalist. And the question is why? And Garda earlier referred to the issue of the ghetto. Jews were in a ghetto until 1793. Because in 1793, the French Revolution, and revolution is important in this story, French Revolution on one day in September 1793 emancipated the Jews, which means legal equality, and freed the slaves, ended slavery in France. That was the change that was brought, and that began to break down the walls of the ghetto, and I'll mention 3 walls. The first one was emancipation. So emancipation, legal equality, spreads from France right around Europe. The only place that it doesn't reach until 1917 is Russia. But that'll be important, I'll come back to that. So that's the first one. The second one is the wall of religion, separating Jews from being able to communicate with other people. That begins to break down. Yiddish as a language, and I'm not opposed to Yiddish because Israel destroyed Yiddish as a culture, but Yiddish as a language disappears from Western Europe. In Russia, in 1900, 97% of Jews spoke Russian. By 1939, it's 54%. The walls of separation in terms of communication, Convivencia, are breaking down. And in religion, too, it's very interesting. In America, and I'll talk about people going to America, only 12% of American Jews were actually linked to synagogues in 2016. It's gone up since, actually, but only 12%. In other words, Jews, it looks like, are being assimilated into becoming part of Western capitalist society. But there's a problem. And the problem is that now that capitalism is in charge, it needs scapegoats. It's making its profits, it's exploiting the mass of the people, and it needs a scapegoat to distract from what it's up to. And the Jews, and I'm talking about Europe here, Jews are the ones that are selected. So the process of assimilation, which, if allowed to continue, would have seen Jews as just part of society like everybody else, all of a sudden they're being singled out. And I want to take us now to where they're singled out most, which is the Pale of Settlement. The Pale of Settlement was about 50% of European Jewry, and it's completely controlled by the Russians. It includes Poland, it includes Ukraine, it includes Belarus, that sort of area, Western Russian Empire. And there's a strange historical accident that happens. The development of industry, industrial capitalism, arrives from the West. In other words, it arrives through the Pale of Settlement. And just to give you one statistic, in 1900, the Kingdom of Poland alone produced more industrial output than the whole of the Russian Empire, the huge Russian Empire. What's the effect of that? The effect of industrialization is to break the Jewish community into two halves. Up until this point in time, the Jewish community has its tensions. There's always, there's rich and there's poor and there's people in the middle. There are tensions there. But this actually creates a class divide within the Jewish community. And the mass, who are not wealthy and are not middle class, are poor industrial workers. It's a very urbanized community, so they are where the industries are. And they begin to organize. They strike, they demonstrate, they do all of these sorts of things. And they don't do it on their own. And the reason they can't do it on their own is because even in the Pale of Settlement, they're 12% of the population. You cannot succeed on your own as 12% of the population against the Tsarist state, against the bosses, against everything that is against you. They work together with other people. They create in the Bund, a Jewish labor Bund, it's a Jewish union, but it works together and consciously works together with everybody else. And it has to be anti-nationalist. And it has to be anti-nationalist because if nationalism develops in Poland, or nationalism develops in Ukraine, or nationalism develops in Belarus and all the rest of it, then Jews become the target once again. So it's consciously rooted in its place. They had a word for it, Doigkeit. It means here-ness. We are rooted in our place. And this was a mass movement on a huge scale. And what's interesting about this movement is it contains two things that normal neighbor movements don't necessarily contain. Number one, it contains the fight against exploitation, the fight for socialism. And the Jews in that time, these people, this particular radical community, were against Tsarism, against the state, against all of those sorts of things. So it's radical in that sense, but it's also fighting against oppression. Because you can't, as a Jewish person, you cannot fight just against the state, you have to fight against the repression. And there's a big reminder of why you need to do that in 1881. Because in 1881, the Tsar is aware of what's happening in the industrialized regions. Jews, non-Jews are uniting together, going on strike, demonstrating, rioting, etc. His regime is under threat. So what does he do? Launches a wave of pogroms. Pogrom, Jewish, anti-Jewish riot. Sometimes people are killed, sometimes people are just beaten up, but that's what it is. And it lasted really, it starts in 1881, and it didn't really stop until, for 50 years. The Holocaust, if you like, is the culmination of this process of demonizing Jews, using them as a scapegoat for the ills of capitalist society. So this begins, and that oppression leads to something we're very, very familiar with today, which is mass emigration. The Jewish community, 10, 11, up to 16 million people by the Second World War, 4 million move. 4 million Jews, most of them from Eastern Europe. And if you've ever wanted an opinion poll on what do Jews think, what is their attitude towards Zionism, because Zionism has come in now since 1896, 4 million on the move, and if you're a Zionist, and there were pre-Zionists as well, working in the 1880s, there's only one place you can go once Herzl has decided it's going to be Palestine. There's only one place you can go, it's Palestine. So if you're a Zionist, you'll go to Palestine. If you're not a Zionist, you'll go anywhere else. Look at the numbers. 1 in 27 went to Palestine. That tells you about the level of support for Zionism before 1948. Okay, it changes, as I'll explain later. But that's very important to understand. So there's a mass tradition, left-wing, anti-capitalist, internationalist to the core, and a tradition rooted in Doikheit, in you fight capitalism, you fight anti-Semitism, you fight racism where you are. That's what here-ness is about. And as I say, it takes various forms, Bundism and Marxism. Okay. And it also has a theoretical expression, which is still with us today. The Jewish radical tradition might have been destroyed, as I'll explain why. Almost destroyed, never completely destroyed, and it's coming back. But there's a theoretical tradition that has come out of it, which you will all recognize probably. And I'll mention three names that tell you about it. Karl Marx, Rosa Luxemburg, and Leon Trotsky. Now, when you say those names, you need to also mention, they're always pinned. This is not a separate Jewish tradition. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. Leon Trotsky and Vladimir Lenin. They're connected. They weren't Jewish. Engels, Liebknecht, and Lenin weren't Jewish. But there's a tradition there of uniting together and fighting against the existence of the horrible capitalist system that we lived in then and we live in today. Okay, I want to move on briefly to have a look at the scale of this. How big is it? Because I'm claiming big things for this. I'll just give you a couple of statistics. First of all, the RSDLP, the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, which became the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks, led to the Russian Revolution. It was formed in 1900, and it was only able to meet, it met in Minsk, in the Pale of Settlement, because the Bund had organised it to be able to be meeting there in secret. The Bund at this time had 30,000 members. All of the rest of the Russian left, because it was the whole left, it was Mensheviks and Bolsheviks together, 8,400. That gives you a sense of the scale and the intensity of this Jewish radical tradition. I'll give you another statistic, but before that I need to have the Russian Revolution. So we'll have the Russian Revolution, it's 1917. In other words, that culmination of Jews and non-Jews working together to overthrow capitalism produces the Russian Revolution in 1917, and that liberates, through emancipation, the largest number of Jews that had ever taken place, because emancipation had been spread around Western Europe, but as I said, the concentration of Jews is in the Pale of Settlement, and at that point, Jews are emancipated. It was the greatest step forward in Jewish history. So revolution, again, unity of people together is where the breakthroughs take place. Okay, so let's have a look at what the implications of this are on an international scale. And I'll just mention, I was told 13 and a half. I've got 2 minutes. I'll be there. I'll get there. I've got one statistic for you then. The United States, millions of Jews have emigrated there. But Jews are still only 1 in 40 of the American population. They were 50% of the American Communist Party. Okay. One other statistic, very, very quickly. Jews in South Africa were 0.3% of the total population. When Nelson Mandela was put on trial with others, every single white person in that room was Jewish. And I'm very proud of that fact. Okay, what happened to the radical Jewish tradition? It's what's happening now, and I'll be finishing up on this. It's what we see now. There was an economic crisis, 1929. There was the rise of the far right. And there was a scapegoating of refugees. And we see it now, and that was happening then. So Hitler comes to power. As soon as he does, all the countries around the world shut their doors to Jews. Britain, you name it, the Dominican Republic, Shanghai, right around the world, refugees are no longer welcome. They used to be before, but not now. And then you get the Second World War and the Holocaust. And during the Holocaust, the Allies could have stopped Auschwitz. They could have stopped what was going on. And they chose absolutely consciously to let it happen. And in that situation, the tragedy is that Zionism, which had been a tiny fraction of the community in terms of conviction, disappears. So that takes over, and really the radical Jewish tradition is pushed right back. So just to finish, this takes us in a circle. Because what we're brought back to is capitalism. Capitalism and imperialism creates, and you can see it every day with the arms that Israel is using, creates the possibility of the horrors taking place in Gaza. And that's why the cause of Gaza is not just the cause of Gaza, it's a global cause for all of us, because when we fight for the rights of Gaza, we fight against the horrible system that made Zionism possible, that made the Holocaust possible, climate change for our future, and we need to finish it off. Thank you.
When you hear this, you see Zionism almost as a guise for all things corrupt in the system. And now that we've looked at the past and taken all these notions that a lot of it has been taken up with revisionist history by Zionism, it's interesting to, unless Yakov decides to join us, to have Awad to sort of bring it all of this back to today and how the sum of the parts equals the whole.
Dear friends, comrades, freedom fighters, it is a profound honor to address this historic gathering, the first anti-Zionist Congress in Vienna. Your courage in organizing this event sends a powerful message. Zionism does not speak for all Jews, and justice in Palestine is not solely a Palestinian cause. It is a global imperative. This Congress reminds the world of a different past, one in which Jews, Christians, and Muslims lived together across the Arab and Islamic worlds in relative harmony long before Zionism shattered that coexistence. In cities like Baghdad, Aleppo, Fez, and of course Jerusalem and Jaffa, diverse communities shared neighborhoods, languages, markets, and daily struggles. Palestine too was once a land where Jews and Palestinians lived side by side as neighbors, not as conquerors. We look into this past not out of nostalgia, but with clarity and purpose. We know another future is possible because it has already existed. A future without apartheid, without walls, without supremacy. Can one state still be imagined? Let me begin by addressing a question so many now ask. Is a shared future still possible? Given the horrors of Gaza, the de facto annexation of the West Bank, and the systematic policies of discrimination, oppression, and bloodtheft against Palestinians and Israel, not to mention the endless wars against neighboring Arab countries and Muslim countries. For the people of Gaza, bombed, starved, burned alive, the very idea of living in one state with those who are exterminating them feels absurd, even insulting. How can one speak of coexistence when children are buried beneath rubble, when the world watches in silence? But even genocide cannot erase us. We are still here. And one day Israelis will awaken to a new reality, that they are isolated, morally and politically bankrupt, and that military might cannot deliver legitimacy nor peace. So we can ask again, what comes after? The answer cannot be Bantustans. It cannot be life under siege. It cannot be endless exile. The only just answer is the dismantling of the Zionist regime and the creation of a single democratic state in all of Palestine, where everyone, regardless of religion or origin, lives as equals under one law with one vote in one shared homeland. Since 2018, I have been part of the One Democratic State campaign, ODSC, a Palestinian-led movement calling for a decolonized, secular, democratic state from the river to the sea. Founding members of this campaign include courageous anti-colonial Jews, like Ellen Pape, who is here, Haim, Bresheeth, who are on the board of the campaign. And also we have Ghada al-Karmi, who is also on the board of the campaign. This vision is not a Western concept. It is not a dream for after peace. It is a continuation of our long-standing struggle for national liberation and justice. Odyssey is not a slogan. It is a political program grounded in equality, justice, and the right of return. It offers a clear alternative to the false solutions we have been offered. Oslo, Bantustan's economic peace. These are not solutions. They are anesthetics, sweetened pills to numb the pain of colonization. In contrast, the one democratic state is the only serious coherent vision that confronts the roots of the conflict, settler colonialism, ethnic cleansing, and the racist structure of the Israeli regime. Despite the obstacles, we are witnessing a growing shift in public consciousness. The idea of one democratic state is gaining traction, especially among younger Palestinians, global solidarity movements, and increasingly among segments of Jewish communities worldwide. Still, our greatest challenge remains the lack of a broad-based grassroots movement that can turn vision into power. That is our task, to organize, to educate, to mobilize across class, geography, and generation. And that is what we are doing. About the Palestinian in Israel. As a Palestinian citizen of Israel and someone deeply engaged in political organizing since early adulthood, let me share a glimpse of our reality and our role in this broader struggle. We are the survivors of the ethnic cleansing of 1948. Nearly every family has relatives in refugee camps, living in appalling conditions. Since the Nakba, we remained in our land, but under a regime that treats us as demographic threat, second-class citizens, in a state built on a Jewish supremacy and exclusion. Our land has been expropriated, our history erased, our language marginalized, and our very presence constantly questions, although we hold Israeli citizenship. For decades, our reality was ignored. While Israel was celebrated in the West as the only democracy in the Middle East, we lived under military rule from 1948 to 1966, 20 years. The world treated us as if we were outside the conflict because it refused to recognize the colonial foundation of the Zionist project. The Oslo Accords only reinforced this erasure. They excluded us from the definition of the Palestinian people, treating us as irrelevant to the political solution. Our disposition was treated as incidental, not systematic. But we refused to disappear. We rejected Oslo, not just because it excluded us, but because it entrenched apartheid, fragmented our people, legitimized Zionism, and prolonged our suffering. In 1995, we launched a political movement that challenged the entire logic of Oslo and the idea of a state built on ethnic supremacy. We demanded a state for all its citizens. It was a party called Balad, in Hebrew Balad, but this is in Arabic, التجمع الوطني الديمقراطي, National Democratic Assembly. This defiance, along with unprecedented grassroots mobilization, especially among youth, shook the Israeli establishment. It reignited Zionist fears about a large, politically conscious Palestinian population with Israel's borders. They were asking questions, the Israelis, how come that despite all the repressive measures that we employed against those Palestinians in Israel, and suddenly they come out in such a defiance and defy the Jewish state, and they take to the streets and join even the uprisings in the West Bank and Gaza Strip peacefully. We never resorted to military tools. We have we have struggled peacefully, legally, and on the popular level. In response, Israel escalated its repression through surveillance, arrests, and confiscations, house demolitions, incitement, and an alarming rise in organized crime. A policy many see as incremental genocide, with over 110 Palestinian citizens killed in such violence just this year. Today, amid Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza, repression inside Israel has intensified. The far right now openly speaks of loyalty tests, deportations, and demographic engineering. We face a future shaped by fascist forces who see us not as citizens, but as enemies from within. And yet, we resist. Because we know our role is not marginal. It is central. We are the link between what Israel claims to be and what it truly is. We are living proof that Israel is not a democracy, but a system of apartheid and settler colonialism, a system now revealed to the world as a genocidal regime. Palestine is a global cause. Today, the Palestinian struggle sits at the heart of the global fight for justice. Across the world, people are rising, students, workers, artists, and Jews of conscience. They are connecting the Palestinian cause to struggles against racism, capitalism, patriarchy, and imperialism. Because the fight for Palestine is not just national, it is universal. It is a moral imperative to join hands with people of conscience everywhere to build a broad, principled, and unapologetically anti-colonial global front. Let this Congress be the beginning of that front. Let it be known. The Palestinian people will not disappear. We will not surrender from the ruins of Gaza to the hills of the Galilee, from refugee camps to diaspora cities. We will keep fighting, not for revenge, but for justice, not to destroy, but to rebuild.
As we've heard these very powerful presentations, I think it's important to open the floor to questions. This is very important information. I mean, we all got stuck in conversations that are difficult to have in spaces that may be uncomfortable. So it's important to even note these talking points and be inspired by them. Does anybody have a question? Come on, guys, be engaged. Yes.
Please keep your questions short and safe. I will hold the mic. Thank you.
Okay, yes. Hello, my name's Haim from London and chair of Architects and Planners for Justice in Palestine. I want to ask the panel, with the terrible, as Haim said, and has all the panels have said, how would it be possible to have a one state when the Palestinians have experienced this terrible genocide? How can they be reconciled with the Israelis, for the genocide itself? What I want to ask them is, where is the one possible way that we can reverse this colonization and strengthen the international action against Israel and Zionism by using the legal aspects of international law to challenge not only Israel, but the leaders of the Western states, using the law to actually take these people to court. I'd like to actually expand on this in the workshops and other panels. But the legal action is our one weapon that we have. We have international law on our side.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Manfred. I'm from Vienna. Today, Israel attacked Iran, and we were talking about a weakening Western, by the USA-led imperialism. I'm wondering, Israel seems to try to pull the US into its war efforts against, Lebanon, against Syria, and now against Iran. And it's on one time, I understand it's a sign of a weakness of Western imperialism that Israel is able to escalate its wars in the way it does right now. But is there also hope that there is a break between the imperialist alliances now that Israel is maybe overreaching with its violence?
Thank you.
Yes. Well, my question is, what effective action steps are you taking to get rid of Zionism? Because it seems like that the Israeli Zionists are immune to international law. They're protecting themselves, against the others,
Thank you.
Hi. I also wanted to ask about how does the one democratic state theory or plan incorporate the right to return in the most practical sense, with so much of the land being in Jewish hands, and of course the population of Palestinians worldwide being so large? And aside from the right of return and the return of land, what other reparations from your perspectives could be appropriate, because there has been so much stolen financially, culturally, etc., etc.? Thank you.
Hello. I have a question to Donny. I wanted to know how was the relationship between Zionism and the Jewish Bund movement?
Thank you.
The problem with the way that you presented the question, Abe, is that international law actually was made totally, it was made impossible tool to use by Zionism. Not in the last 2 years, but since 1948. The first thing that the UN did when it was created is divided Palestine. The partition of Palestine was made by a baby UN. That baby UN had as much, as much intelligence as a baby. It had no experience, and they have created the problem of Palestine. And in 1949, when they realized that they have created the Nakba, they have created the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, they tried to reverse it by saying Israel has to allow every single Palestinian back into Palestine. This is the resolution 194, the famous one. Israel just poo-pooed on this, yeah? They just said, no, we're not going to do it. Now, the UN didn't know what to do. It was a very young organization, and they decided not to do anything. And this is what has happened ever since. 60% of all resolutions passed at the UN are about Israel-Palestine. Think about it. One country on this earth, Palestine, has 60% of all UN resolutions, and the rest of the world has 40%. That tells you that the UN is a useless body, and it was made useless by Zionism and the West. So it's very easy. It's very easy to say, let us use international law. Israel has made international law a tool that is blunt and it's impossible to use. Now, if you want to look at South Africa, which a number of us are very concerned with, South Africa has not produced the solution to what one state could be. It produced a partial solution, a very faulty one. And that's because they were forced to the letter of the law by the United States. For example, the whites, the white elite has not lost anything in South Africa, and as a result, blacks are not equal citizens even today, despite the ANC ruling South Africa. The ODSC campaign is not going to copy South Africa. We're going to learn from this, and that means that we cannot just look at international law. Now, after 1945, there was a problem. How do you live with Germans in Europe? That was just as difficult a question as we're discussing in Palestine. How do you live with the genociders in your midst?
Haim,
the solution was...
I think with that one we can move on to Awad, and he can give us this kind of sentiment. And this was something interesting because Haim and I were talking about it before the conference. This is something global, but to you specifically as a Palestinian, how do you thrive afterwards when we're talking about this one state? How do you then continue, as Haim was saying, how were they able to then live and continue to live side by side with Germans, with the same people that were either silent about the Holocaust or complicit?
You know, the struggle for the liberation of Palestine and the establishment of one democratic state between the river and the sea is a long struggle. It's very complex. And we are not naive to believe that this would happen soon. And we have, even before the genocide, we were aware that this will take long years. So we have to put the correct strategy. We have to build the movement. And that is the biggest challenge. Now there are more challenges, no doubt, that challenges arising from the genocide, and the sentiments that are arising from that could be temporary. But when people are engaged in struggle, I think they will overcome that. Because if you continue to think of just how to revenge, I don't think that we can proceed. So I can't speak in detail about the one democratic state and the campaign and the logic behind it, because the next panel, Gada and Elan will speak about that, about other people, I think. And that takes much time, I mean, to address the questions and the challenges. And no doubt that during our work and reaching out to people, we also faced with the questions, even before the genocide, how could we live with these settlers? But we Palestinians, for example, about 2 million who hold Israeli citizenship, who are living side by side with the Israelis, but under an apartheid regime. So, I mean, because some Palestinian intellectuals, and maybe some Israelis also, who are anti-colonial, would think that Palestinians and Israel are best placed to play a role in the one democratic state, because we are familiar with citizenship and because we are dealing with Israelis every day. But that today things are changing, because the Israelis and the Israeli society, not only the Israeli government, are becoming more aggressive, more hostile, more antagonistic against Palestinians. But these challenges are being dealt, and we are aware of that. We are aware of the difficulties, the challenges, these sentiments, and there is no another option. So also I would say one point, the last point.
Can you get closer to the mic?
Okay. Is that some, for example, Palestinians would ask questions. Why should we call for one democratic state? Is it that only for the Jews in Israel, is just for the sake of the Jews? It's not only, we tell them that it's not only for this, because there are Israelis in Palestine, or because Israeli Jews. Because we Palestinians, we need a democratic state, because we are not satisfied with any Arab country in the world, in the Arab country, because the Arab regimes are dictators, and we need a different Palestinian state that could be a role model for the rest of the Arab masses. So this is inherent in our thinking, is that we want to introduce a modern, progressive model in Palestine where Palestinians and Jews can live together. And even we say that if there were no Jews there, we still need a democratic state, because the idea of living with people who genocide us is causing outrage, anger. But anyway, we as experienced people, we adult people, we are not young to think just of emotions. We need to work together And really, from this conference, we can draw courage for the future, to tell our people also there are many Jews, though still the minority, that who can cooperate and since we also believe that our campaign is a global one, we believe that Israel is not also hurting the Palestinians. It's partner in the oppression of other people because it's selling arms to regimes, to other regimes all over the world. It's part of the capitalist system. It's part of the imperial system which created the Palestinian cause, which created the Jewish question. So this is why we have to work hard and we have to explain us well so that we can reach out to people and convince them to be part of this campaign or this effort.
Donny, we're gonna have you answer, and then thankfully we've gotten Yakov on the screen. So after Donny answers this question, we're gonna have a listen from Yakov.
Thanks. Quickly on international law. It's not our law, it's their law. Have a look at the Security Council. Who makes it up? The victors of imperialism. America, Britain, France, Russia, and China was the ally of America. It's their law, they use it. Why is it that because the references were made to all the resolutions, they're all blocked because we don't control the system, imperialism does. The International Criminal at the Court of Justice, 59 of the 65 people who've been put on trial have been black African dictators. I'm pleased they went on trial. But it shows you the absolute bias of the whole system. It is not genuine neutral law. However, it's extremely useful for our side because the word genocide came out of that ICJ ruling and we use it and we use it and we use it to build our movement. But it won't be international law, I'm afraid, that saves us. It'll be our movement that changes things. I wish it was easier. There are no shortcuts. Zionism and the Bund. The Bund hated Zionism. It was everything that the Bund did not stand for. That's what the word Deutschland means. Deutschland means here, not Palestine. That's what it means. So no, they hated each other. And quite rightly, the Bund was completely rejected Zionism. Manfred's question about overreach. In other words, is there anything that Israel can do that will go too far? Well, I'll tell you what it depends on. It actually depends on the Arab states. Because and Garda referred to it earlier, this is a system of imperialist states. They all back each other up in different ways. Why is it that the Saudis are not supplying arms? They've got a lot of arms to the Palestinians. Why is it that, just look at the situation. It's an imperialist system. They're all in it together. Israel is the leading edge of it, and therefore they get away with it. It's the guard dog, and the guard dog is going around biting everybody. But it's imperialist guard dog. Think if they cut off the arms, the Israeli army would collapse and the whole campaign would collapse. They're all in it together. We're all in it to oppose them, and we need to do that.
I think since you've already touched up on it, we can also have the question of, now that Israel has hit Iran, is it far-reaching? Is this a sign of collapse? As if it's on a frenzy. Does anybody want to answer that? Or Yakov, do you want to answer that in your speech as well? Can you hear me?
So, as a historian, I would like to begin by saying that the Zionist movement is in origin a Christian Protestant movement that began in the 17th century with the book, Shall They Return to Jerusalem Again? And it involved a lot of very important Protestants, including Sir Isaac Newton, who was predicting a Jewish return to Palestine and the reconstruction of the Third Temple. And of course, it also connected with Earl of Shaftesbury, who made it a strategic, important goal to establish some kind of a Jewish presence in Palestine in mid-19th century. But the Jews joined, or some Jews joined this movement only by the end of the 19th century. And it's important to understand that one of the key persons who introduced Theodor Herzl to the idea of bringing Jews to Palestine was the Reverend William Eckler, who was the chaplain of the English embassy. And in his diary, Herzl is very appreciative of Eckler, and he also says that Eckler was giving him excellent advice. So then we can understand why the first Zionist Congress was held in Basel and not in Munich as originally planned, because opposition to Zionism came from three main sources. One was the religious one, the other one was social, and finally there was a political. So why it was held in Basel and not in Munich? Because German Jewish organizations protested against holding the Zionist movement, Zionist Congress in Germany. They didn't want to join the Zionist movement because the message of the Zionists was very similar to that of the anti-Semites, who were saying, you don't belong here, you belong somewhere else, namely in Palestine. Jews who were socially mobile, economically mobile, didn't want to hear this message, and that's why they did their best to distance themselves from the Zionist movement. However, now the second opposition came from within the British cabinet. After the Balfour Declaration, the only Jewish member of the British cabinet, Edwin Montagu, accused the British government of anti-Semitism. He says, I've chosen the above title, the Memorandum on the Anti-Semitism of the present government, because I wish to place on record my view that the policy of His Majesty's government is anti-Semitic in result and will prove a rallying ground for anti-Semites in every country of the world. I think he was quite correct in that. So that was the social source of opposition. Then there was a religious source of opposition, because the idea of gathering Jews in Palestine before the arrival of Messiah, and particularly by people who were utterly anti-religious or irreligious, was very much opposed by practically all religious leaders in Judaism. So they even tried to organize a delegation to London in the early 20s to convince the British government that the Zionists don't represent the Jews. And that was the first occasion when the Zionist militia committed the first terrorist act, when they killed the organizer of this delegation to London, Jacob Israel Dehan, in 1924. But the religious opposition to Zionism continues to this day, because you could see often both Orthodox and Reconstructionists and other liberal denominations who oppose it. And now the third source of opposition is political. Many Jews took part in radical left-wing movements at the turn of the 20th century, and all kinds of socialists were opposed to the idea of a separate nation-state for the Jews. They considered that it is more important to fight for equality and anti-Semitism and against anti-Semitism in the countries where they were. Particularly important in that sense was Bund, the Jewish Labor Alliance, which was organized in Lithuania in 1897, the same year the first Zionist Congress. And for the Bund, the problem was that Zionism was distracting Jews from political struggle for equality and for socialism. So for them, and they issued a declaration against Zionism for socialism throughout the 1920s. As a result, today you have opposition to Zionism from Jewish circles that continues along those three avenues. One is the social, those Jews who are well integrated into the society and have no intention of belonging to the Israeli nation. Then there is religious opposition, which again includes the ultra-Orthodox, who are the most visible, but also religious opposition from organizations like the Jewish Voice for Peace, which also includes quite a few rabbis, and who, if you saw the pictures, even occupied the Statue of Liberty with a slogan, "Palestinians should be free." So these three sources of opposition to Zionism continue to this day, and I think it's very important to understand that Zionism is a relatively late movement among the Jews, but much older among Christian Protestants. And that is why the main source that Benjamin Netanyahu managed to mobilize while he was Israeli representative at the UN in New York is the Christian Protestants, the evangelical Christians, who are much more numerous than Jews in the world, and I would dare say that they're much more influential. So you have to keep in mind that when you engage in anti-Zionist activity, you engage not so much against Jews as you engage against evangelical Christians. I suppose my 8 minutes are over. Thank you for your attention.
That was a very interesting summation, and I thought I knew a lot, but I had no idea that it was such an old movement amongst evangelical Christians, and it explains so much. We answered most of the questions, but we had one question which was very important, and I like this question because, and I appreciate all the questions, because it's as if everyone in the room here is convinced that this is the beginning of the end of Zionism. And all the questions are assuming such. And this is what Donny was saying. It is up to the movement. And so this is the question. What would be the appropriate reparations, seeing the damage, the theft of heritage, of culture, of history? And who would like, Haim, would you like to begin with answering this question?
There's no question. The ODSC program, for one, but all the ODS programs, there are three, are speaking about the return of the refugees to Palestine. Without that, nothing will happen. That is the starting position. Now, we cannot actually foresee any life in a democratic state without de-Zionization of Palestine. In other words, like denazification in 1945, there has to be a de-Zionization of every single institution, every single group. Without that, we will end up with the same Zionism again. That's why we are against two-state solution. It doesn't exist, it's dead. But even if it wasn't, we would be against it because it will keep Zionism alive. So this is a difficult one to do. And Rada pointed out the role of Jews in this process. We must follow the lead of Palestinian political leadership. The one-state democratic solution is a Palestinian program. It's not a Jewish or Israeli program. In the 20s, the Palestinians suggested it. In 1947, they suggested it. There were two resolutions before the UN. one for one democratic state in the whole of Palestine, which was put there by the Arab countries, by the Palestinians, and by the Latin Americans, and the division of the country that won because of the West mainly, and also the Soviet Union, let's not forget. So basically, we are talking about a program which is purely Palestinian, like the ANC in South Africa. We anti-Zionist Jews have to accept and to actually like the fact that we are with the Palestinians, led by them. We need to de-Zionize, decolonize Palestine. That is our role, so that there is not a vestige, not a law, not a regulation, not part of any part of Palestine. And I think, Gabi, you asked about what we think about the settlements. Yeah, I mean, no settlement is legal, yeah? The ICJ and the ICC have already made their voice heard. Every settlement has to go. Every institution has to go. There's got to be a state from the ground up with 7.5 million Palestinians that were never recompensated for what happened to them. They have to come back. And Salman Abu Sita, the great geographer of Palestine, has proved that that is not only possible, but this is the just solution. So this is, I think, the beginning of the solution.
We're about out of time, but I really wanted to listen to closing remarks, 1 minute long, how you're feeling, and a message to everyone that's sitting here today, because we're all in this together. So even if it's just words of encouragement. And Donny, we can start with you.
Okay, very briefly. In terms of what we need to do, I see the rise of the far right in Europe as the domestic version of what's happening in Palestine. They're two wings of the same thing. And that means we need to unite together for both. I want to see anti-racists marching for Palestine. I want to see Palestine marching for anti-racism. And there's a practical example. 2 weeks ago in Edinburgh, the far right turned up in our city. We brought together the Palestine campaign and Stand Up to Racism, British anti-racist movement. 250 of us, 30 of them, we humiliated them. They were totally in disarray. We need to bring that energy that we have together. And that means the trade unions, that means civil society, that means all of those movements, the working class, every area we need to unite together against these bastards.
And now, Awad, for you, call to action.
Yeah, I want to emphasize one point regarding the refugees. I mean, I'm not going to say a closing remark. Just to clarify one point that is ignored or overlooked by many people is that the refugees, because commenting on the questions was raised by the woman there, is that we Palestinians inside Israel, we are the refugees. I mean, who are the refugees? They are us, because they are our relatives. Every family in the Galilee, in the Triangle, in the Naqab, every family, almost every family, has relatives in the exile, in the refugee camps. When we demand equality in Israel, we demand equality for the refugees to return, not only because there is a resolution, UN Resolution 194, but because as Israel claims that it is a democratic society and proclaims equality, we also need that our relatives be back. By the way, in 1982, and once when I mentioned this fact in United States in one of my touring speeches, and they were surprised about this fact. Two of my cousins were killed by the Israelis in 1982. when the Israeli invaded Lebanon. And my aunt, in 1992, came to Palestine. You know, Israelis used a system where we used to allow for all people to visit Palestine. That's for propaganda. And she, for the first time I met her, she was at our house. And she was asking me if I can help find the body of one of her sons. She was still looking for the body. She was born in my village, next to my house, and she would not be back to her house, although she was still about 80-year-old. So I mean, when we emphasize, because some people would say that the right of return is unrealistic, you should drop that. No, this is a personal issue even. It's not also a national issue. The refugees are not only part of our people, but they are our relatives, our blood relatives. So this is why we think that the right of return for the campaign, for our campaign, is crucial, is a central point. There is no compromise over this point. Thank you.
And Haim, if we could end with you.
I just want to say something short. Israel is a Jewish democracy, and it's not even democratic for Jews, of course, but it's definitely not democratic for any Palestinian. Just to mention that the genocide is totally democratic. Why am I saying this? Because all polls looking at the views of Israeli Jews, because they never look at the views of Palestinians in Israel, they looked at 5,000 in one case and 10,000 in another. So these are not small samples. In both cases, between 82% and 97%, depending when the poll was taken, between 82% and 97% of Israeli Jews supported the genocide in Palestine. This is the first genocide that is supported democratically by the population. It's never happened before. This is also a Jewish genocide that makes it 1,000 times worse. And I want to end by saying there is nothing Jewish about genocide. There is nothing Jewish about apartheid. There is nothing Jewish about settler colonialism. There is nothing Jewish about what Israel is doing, and there is nothing Jewish about the Jewish state. Enough is enough. One democratic state for all.
Can we give our panelists a round of applause? And then can we also give yourselves a round of applause? Because anybody who is here today is proving that they're human. And that's the simplest thing you could be and the best thing you could be. So let's be the opposite of Zionism. Let's be kindness and let's empower each other.